Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin. Douglas Casey stood at the window of his daughter's hospital room, watching the sunset paint the Virginia sky in shades of blood and amber. The rhythmic beep of machines filled the silence, each pulse a reminder that Sarah was alive, but the bandages covering half her face told a different story. The doctor said she'd need reconstructive surgery, multiple procedures. The brick had shattered her cheekbone, fractured her orbital socket, and torn through flesh that would never quite heal the same way. Ellen, his wife, sat beside their daughter's bed, holding Sarah's hand with a grip that hadn't loosened in 6 hours. Her eyes were dry now, but red and swollen from the tears that had fallen when they first arrived. Douglas could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at Sarah's face and then looking away, as if the sight was too much to bear. "Dad!" Sarah's voice was weak, distorted by the swelling and the medication. She was 17, a senior at Georgetown Prep, with a scholarship to Yale waiting for her in the fall. Or, at least, that had been the plan before yesterday. Douglas moved to her bedside, taking her other hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. Is he going to jail? The guy who did this?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He exchanged a look with Ellen, whose expression hardened. They both knew the answer, had heard it from 3 different lawyers and 2 detectives in the past 12 hours. "We're working on it," Douglas said, his voice steady even as rage churned in his gut. But Sarah wasn't a child anymore. She could read the hesitation in his eyes. "He's not, is he?" Before Douglas could answer, there was a knock at the door. Detective Brian Cruz stepped inside, his face carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered bad news professionally. Behind him stood a woman in an expensive suit, Assistant District Attorney Marion Cornell. Douglas kissed Sarah's forehead and gestured for Ellen to stay with her. He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "Mr. Casey," Cornell began, her voice professionally apologetic, "I wish I had better news." "Diplomatic immunity," Douglas said flatly. It wasn't a question. Cruz nodded, anger flickering in his eyes. The detective had been the first responder, had seen what Francisco Barker had done. The kid's father is Ricardo Barker, attached to the Venezuelan consulate. Full diplomatic immunity extends to family members. The State Department won't budge. So he just walks away? Douglas's voice was quiet, controlled. Too controlled. Cornell shifted uncomfortably. "I've made calls to everyone I can think of. But legally, our hands are tied. He can't even be arrested. The most we can do is expel him from the country, and even that requires going through diplomatic channels that could take months." Months. Douglas repeated the word like it was poison. "I'm sorry," Cornell said, and she meant it. If there was anything, where is he now? Cruz and Cornell exchanged glances. "Mr. Casey, where is he?" "At his father's residence in Georgetown," Cruz said carefully. "Mr. Casey, I understand what you're feeling, but do you?" Douglas's eyes had gone cold. "Do you understand what it's like to watch your daughter's face get destroyed by some entitled piece of shit with a brick, and then be told that there's nothing anyone can do about it?" "No," Cruz admitted. "I don't. But I know what it's like to want revenge and not be able to get it through legal means. And I'm telling you, man to man, that if you go after this kid, you'll be the one in jail. Not him. You." Douglas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you for your time, Detective. Ms. Cornell." He walked back into Sarah's room without another word. That night, after Ellen finally fell asleep in the chair beside Sarah's bed, Douglas stepped out into the hospital parking lot. The air was cold, carrying the bite of late March. He walked to his car, a 10-year-old Ford sedan that suited his life as a freelance consultant for nonprofits. Boring, respectable, completely unremarkable. He popped the trunk and moved aside the emergency kit and jumper cables. Beneath them, hidden in a compartment he'd built himself, was a satellite phone. Old technology, bulky and outdated, but impossible to trace. He'd kept it all these years, telling himself he'd never need it, that the man he used to be was dead and buried. That man had worked for the CIA in the late 90s, running operations in Eastern Europe during the chaos following the Soviet collapse. Black operations, the kind that didn't appear in any official record. He'd been good at it, too good, until a mission in Chechnya went wrong and 3 of his team members died. He'd gotten out after that, married Ellen, tried to build a normal life. But some connections never died. Some debts never expired. Douglas pulled out the satellite phone and stared at it. There was only one number programmed into it, a number that connected to a place that shouldn't exist, a former gulag in Siberia that had been converted into something else entirely. Something darker. In 1998, during his time in Moscow, Douglas had worked with a group of former Soviet Special Forces soldiers who'd gone private after the USSR collapsed. They called themselves the Volkov Brigade, the Wolf Brigade. They did things that even the CIA couldn't officially touch. When Douglas needed someone disappeared in Chechnya, someone who was trafficking weapons to terrorists, the brigade had made it happen. No questions, no records, no bodies. Their leader, a man named Alexei Volkov, had told Douglas that he owed him a favor. One day, American, you will need something that your government cannot give you. When that day comes, call this number. Say the words. The pack will answer. Douglas had never called. Not when his mother died, not when he lost his job during the 2008 recession, not even when Ellen was diagnosed with breast cancer 5 years ago, and they'd nearly lost their home paying for treatment. He'd sworn he would never be that man again. But Francisco Barker had changed everything. Douglas powered on the satellite phone. It took a minute to acquire a signal, searching for satellites that should have been decommissioned years ago, but somehow still functioned. When it finally connected, he dialed the number from memory. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Douglas almost hung up, almost convinced himself that this was insane, that there had to be another way. Then someone picked up. No greeting, just the sound of breathing on the other end. The wolf is hungry, Douglas said in Russian, the words feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. There was a pause. Then a voice he recognized, deeper and rougher than he remembered, but unmistakably Alexei Volkov. Americanets. I wondered if you would ever call. I need help. Obviously. The wolf does not hunger without reason. Tell me, Douglas explained, keeping his voice flat and emotionless even as rage threatened to choke him. Sarah's face, the brick, the diplomatic immunity, the smugness on Francisco Barker's face when the police had to let him go. When he finished, Volkov was quiet for a long moment. This diplomat's son, Volkov, said finally, "He hurt your daughter?" "Yes." "And your government will do nothing?" "They say they can't." Another pause. Then, "I will bring the pack. 3 days. Do not contact me again. We will contact you." The line went dead. Douglas stood in the parking lot for a long time, the phone still in his hand. He just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But as he thought of Sarah's destroyed face, of the smirk on Francisco Barker's face, of the impotent fury in Detective Cruz's eyes, he felt no regret. Only certainty. He returned to Sarah's room, slipping back into the chair beside Ellen. His wife stirred, reaching for his hand without opening her eyes. "Where were you?" she murmured. "Just needed some air," he said softly. "Doug, yeah. I want him to suffer." Her eyes opened, and in them he saw a reflection of his own rage. That boy who did this. I want him to hurt the way Sarah's hurting. Douglas squeezed her hand. "He will." "How?" "The lawyers said." "I know what the lawyers said." "Trust me, Ellen. He will." She studied his face in the dim light, seeing something there that made her breath catch. She'd known about his past, the broad strokes at least. CIA, dangerous work, classified details. But she'd never seen this side of him, cold and certain and dangerous. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. "Well, I should have done the moment I saw our daughter in that hospital bed," Douglas said. "I'm going to make sure Francisco Barker understands that some sins can't be protected by diplomatic immunity." Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Good." Sarah stirred in her sleep, whimpering as she shifted position. The pain medication was wearing off. Douglas pressed the call button for the nurse, his mind already turning over the possibilities. 3 days until Volkov arrived. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to plan exactly how Francisco Barker would pay for what he'd done. The wolf was hungry, and soon the pack would feed. The call came on the 3rd day, exactly as promised. Douglas was at home, having left Ellen at the hospital with Sarah. Their daughter was improving physically, but the psychological damage was becoming apparent. She flinched at loud noises, refused to look at herself in mirrors, and had stopped talking about Yale. The therapist said it was normal for trauma victims. That time would help. But Douglas knew some wounds never truly healed. His phone, his regular cell phone, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Arlington Cemetery. Tomb of the Unknown. 1 hour. Douglas deleted the message and drove to Arlington. Spring was beginning to assert itself, trees budding green against the white headstones that stretched in perfect rows across the hills. He parked and walked to the tomb, standing among a small crowd of tourists watching the changing of the guard ceremony. A man sidled up beside him. Late 40s, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much. He wore a Georgetown University sweatshirt and jeans, looking like any other tourist, but Douglas recognized the subtle tells. The way he scanned the crowd, the positioning of his feet for quick movement, the slight bulge under his jacket that suggested a weapon. Americanettes, the man said quietly in Russian. Alexei, to walk with me. They moved away from the crowd, walking slowly along the pathways between the graves. Volkov's English was heavily accented but fluent. I brought 3 men. Good men. Professionals. We have been in country for 2 days, learning about your target. And Francisco Barker, 23 years old, son of Ricardo Barker, Venezuelan diplomatic attaché. The son is spoiled, reckless, believes himself untouchable. This is not the first time he has hurt someone. Douglas felt his jaw tighten. What do you mean? Volkov pulled out a phone and showed him a series of photographs and news articles. 2 years ago, in Caracas, a girl from the American school. Broken arm, concussion. Her parents tried to press charges. Ricardo Barker had them deported. Last year, in Miami during a vacation, a boy at a nightclub. Ruptured spleen. Police report disappeared. We found 5 other incidents. Your daughter is not his first victim. The rage that Douglas had been keeping carefully controlled threatened to break free. Where is he now? The residence in Georgetown. But he will not stay there. We have been watching. Every night, he goes to clubs. Tonight, he has reservations at a place called Vertigo in DuPont Circle. He will be there with friends. Then we take him there. And yet, too public, too many witnesses. We let him have his fun. Then we follow him home. Volkov's smile was cold. And then we make him disappear. What about his father? The diplomatic protection. Diplomatic immunity protects them from your laws. It does not protect them from us. Volkov paused. But you must understand, Americanettes. What we will do, it cannot be undone. When we are finished, there will be no trial, no prison, no chance for redemption. Only justice. The old kind. Douglas thought of Sarah's face, of the smirk on Francisco Barker's face, of all the other victims whose families have been silenced and bullied into submission. Do it, he said. Volkov nodded. You will not participate directly. This is for your protection. We will handle everything. But you must do something for us. What? Tonight, when it happens, you will be at the hospital with your wife and daughter. Visible. Many witnesses. You will have an alibi beyond question. And Ricardo Barker? Leave him to us. The son will disappear first. Then, when the father is frantic, desperate, making demands, he will learn that diplomatic immunity has limits. Volkov's eyes were dead, emotionless. He will learn what happens when you hurt the wrong man's daughter. They stood there among the graves of soldiers who had died defending their country, and Douglas Casey made peace with what was about to happen. He wasn't those soldiers. What he was doing wasn't noble or heroic. It was revenge, pure and simple. But sometimes, he thought, revenge was all that was left when justice failed. One more thing, Volkov said. The pack has a rule. When we do this kind of work, there is a price. Not money. We do not want your money. But someday, we may call on you for a favor. You will not refuse. Douglas had expected this. Nothing was free, especially not for men like the Volkov Brigade. What kind of favor? We do not know yet. Perhaps we never will. But if we call, you answer. This is the price of the hunt. It was a blank check, a debt that could come due in any form at any time. Douglas should have walked away, should have found another way, worked within the system, appealed to the State Department, something. But he thought of Sarah's destroyed face and knew he would have made a deal with the devil himself if it meant Francisco Barker would pay. Agreed, he said. Volkov extended his hand. They shook, and Douglas felt the weight of what he'd just committed to. Tonight, then, be with your family. We will send word when it is done. I want to know what you do to him. Are you certain? Yes. Volkov studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. When it is finished, we will tell you everything. They parted ways, Volkov disappearing into the crowds of tourists while Douglas walked back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands on the wheel, trying to process what he'd set in motion. His phone rang. Ellen. Hey, he said, forcing normalcy into his voice. Sarah wants you here, Ellen said. The doctor is talking about when she can come home, and she wants you to be part of the conversation. I'm on my way. 20 minutes. Doug, are you okay? You sound. I'm fine. Just tired. I'll be there soon. He hung up and started the car, driving back toward the hospital and his family. Tonight, while he sat beside his daughter's bed, while he held his wife's hand and tried to be strong for them both, somewhere in the city, the Volkov Brigade would be hunting. And Francisco Barker would learn that some predators were worse than any law. The evening passed slowly. Douglas sat with Sarah and Ellen, discussing physical therapy schedules and reconstructive surgery timelines. Sarah was in good spirits, relatively speaking, hopeful that she might still make it to Yale in the fall if the recovery went well. Douglas smiled and encouraged her, playing the supportive father while his mind was elsewhere, wondering what was happening in DuPont Circle. At 10:47 p.m., his phone vibrated. A text from the unknown number. The wolf has found his prey. Douglas excused himself to get coffee. In the hallway, he texted back, status? The response came immediately, following. We'll have him within the hour. Stay where you are. Douglas bought coffee from the machine and returned to Sarah's room. Ellen had fallen asleep again, exhausted from 3 days of constant vigil. Sarah was awake, scrolling through her phone with one hand, the other resting in a cast where she'd broken 2 fingers trying to defend herself. Dad, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think I'm going to be ugly now? Her voice broke on the last word. Like, permanently? Douglas set down his coffee and took her hand. Sarah, listen to me. You are beautiful. You've always been beautiful. And yes, you're going to have scars. The doctors can minimize them, but they'll be there. But scars don't make you ugly, sweetheart. They make you strong. They show that you survived something terrible. That's easy for you to say, she whispered. You're not the one who has to live with it. You're right. I'm not. And I can't pretend to know what you're going through. But I know you, Sarah. I know that you're stronger than you think. You're going to get through this. She wiped at her eyes with her good hand. I keep seeing his face. That guy Francisco. He was smiling when he did it. Like it was funny. Douglas felt his blood go cold. What do you mean? When he hit me with a brick. He was smiling. And after I fell, he laughed. He said, she swallowed hard. He said, maybe that'll teach you to watch where you're walking, bitch. Sarah, you didn't tell the police that. I was scared. His dad's a diplomat. What if he came back? What if? He won't, Douglas said firmly. He's never going to hurt you again. I promise you that. How can you promise that? The lawyer said. Sarah. Douglas's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I promise you. Trust me. She studied his face, seeing something there that she didn't quite understand but somehow found comforting. Okay, she said finally. I trust you. His phone vibrated again. Douglas glanced at it casually, but his pulse quickened when he saw the message. We have him. Moving to location. I should let you get some rest, Douglas said, kissing Sarah's forehead. Big day tomorrow. The plastic surgeon is coming by, remember? Yeah. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. He settled into the chair beside Ellen, who stirred and reached for his hand in her sleep. Douglas held it, watching the minutes tick by on the wall clock. 11:30, 11:45, midnight. At 12:17 a.m., his phone lit up with a video call from the unknown number. Douglas's heart hammered. He couldn't answer it here, not with Ellen and Sarah nearby. He carefully extracted his hand from Ellen's grip and stepped out into the hallway, moving quickly to an empty waiting room at the far end of the floor. He answered the call. Alexei Volkov's face filled the screen, illuminated by harsh fluorescent light. Behind him, Douglas could see a concrete room, pipes running along the ceiling. A basement or warehouse of some kind. Americanettes, Volkov said. Your daughter said he was smiling when he attacked her. Is this true? Douglas felt his throat tighten. Yes, she just told me. Volkov's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Good. Then he will learn that smiles can be taken as easily as they are given. He turned the camera. Francisco Barker was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the room. His expensive clothes were torn and dirty. Blood ran from his nose and a split lip. His eyes were wide with terror, darting between three men who stood around him, the Volkov Brigade. But he was still alive, still conscious. You wanted to know what we would do, Volkov said, the camera back on his face. I will tell you, but you may want to turn away. No, Douglas said. I want to see it. Volkov nodded. Very well. We will begin with the fingers. The same fingers he broke on your daughter. Then we move to the face. The same face he destroyed. And finally, he smiled cold and merciless. We will take his future, just as he tried to take hers. The camera turned back to Francisco. One of the brigade members, a massive man with a shaved head, approached with a pair of bolt cutters. What happened next took 17 minutes. Douglas watched every second of it. When it was over, when Francisco Barker's screams had faded to whimpers and then to silence, Volkov's face reappeared on the screen. It is done, he said simply. The paramedics will find him tomorrow morning, alive but changed. He will never smile like that again. He will never hurt another person again. This I promise you. And his father? Ricardo Barker will be dealt with separately. Not tonight, but soon. He must first understand what his son's crimes have cost him. Then we will teach him the true price of diplomatic immunity. Volkov paused. Are you satisfied, Americanettes? Douglas thought about it. He should have felt sick, should have felt horror at what he just witnessed. But all he felt was a cold, hollow satisfaction. Francisco Barker had hurt his daughter while smiling. Now he would never smile again. Yes, Douglas said. I'm satisfied. Good. Then we are finished. Delete this number. Burn the phone. Forget we ever existed. Unless someday we call on you for that favor. Then you remember everything. The screen went dark. Douglas sat in the empty waiting room for a long time, processing what he'd seen. Then he walked to the men's bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and vomited until there was nothing left. He washed his face, rinsed his mouth, and stared at himself in the mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger. Someone capable of watching another human being be systematically destroyed and feeling nothing but satisfaction. Someone who had just made a deal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But when he thought of Sarah, of her smile before Francisco Barker had taken it from her, he knew he would make the same choice again. Every single time. He returned to Sarah's room. Ellen was awake now, sipping the coffee he'd left behind. You were gone a while, she said. Needed to walk. Clear my head. She studied him. Did something happen? No, he lied. Nothing happened. But Ellen knew him too well. She saw the change in his eyes, the set of his jaw. She knew that something had shifted tonight, something fundamental and irreversible. She also knew not to ask. Come to bed, she said, patting the reclining chair beside her. They're bringing in a cot for me. You can sleep here. Douglas settled in beside her, and they sat in silence, watching Sarah sleep. Tomorrow would bring more doctors, more discussions about surgery and recovery. But tonight, for the first time since the attack, Douglas felt like he could breathe. The wolf had been hungry. Now was fed. The news broke the next morning. A jogger in Rock Creek Park had found a man lying near the trail, barely conscious, mutilated in ways that the news wouldn't specify. The victim was identified as Francisco Barker, son of Venezuelan diplomat Ricardo Barker. He was being treated at George Washington University Hospital. His condition was described as critical but stable. Detective Brian Cruz showed up at Sarah's room around noon, his expression grim. Mr. Casey, Mrs. Casey, can I speak with you outside for a moment? Douglas's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. He and Ellen stepped into the hallway. Francisco Barker was attacked last night, Cruz said without preamble. Badly. Someone worked him over pretty thoroughly. Is he dead? Ellen asked, her voice flat. No, but he's never going to be the same. Whoever did this It was professional. Precise. They knew exactly what they were doing. Cruz was watching Douglas carefully. Douglas met his gaze steadily. Why are you telling us this? Because I need to know where you were last night. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Here, Douglas said immediately. With my wife and daughter. Ask any of the nurses on this floor. I was in Sarah's room the entire time. He's telling the truth, Ellen added. We were both here all night. Cruz nodded slowly. Yeah, I already checked with the nursing staff. They confirmed you were here. He paused. The thing is, Mr. Casey, Ricardo Barker is claiming this was retaliation. He's pointing fingers at you. On what basis? On the basis that his son put your daughter in the hospital, and now he's been attacked. He's demanding an investigation. Then investigate, Douglas said calmly. You'll find I was exactly where I said I was. Cruz studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. Look, off the record, whoever did this to Francisco Barker, they did the world a favor. Kid was a monster. I've been digging into his history, and what I've found, let's just say your daughter wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't have been his last if he hadn't been stopped. You're saying someone should be thanked for nearly killing him? Ellen asked. I'm not saying anything officially, but personally, yeah, I think whoever did this was someone who actually gave a damn about justice. Real justice, not the legal kind that lets rich kids hide behind diplomatic immunity. Cruz looked directly at Douglas. But I also know that whoever did this crossed a line. And if Ricardo Barker pushes hard enough, if he brings in federal investigators, things could get complicated. I understand, Douglas said. But I had nothing to do with it. I was here with my family. I believe you, Cruz said, and Douglas could tell he meant it. Just watch your back, okay? Ricardo Barker is connected. He's going to want revenge for what happened to his son. After Cruz left, Ellen turned to Douglas. He knows, she whispered. He suspects. But he can't prove anything because there's nothing to prove. I was here all night. You saw me. But you knew it was going to happen. You knew. I knew nothing, Douglas said firmly, taking her hands. We're going to stay focused on Sarah, on getting her better. That's all that matters. Ellen searched his face. Who did you call, Doug? No one you need to worry about. Are we safe? Is Sarah safe? Yes. I promise you, we're safe. It wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. But it was the answer Ellen needed to hear, so she accepted it. Over the next week, the investigation into Francisco Barker's attack went nowhere. The scene had been clean, no witnesses, no forensic evidence beyond generic fibers and trace elements that could have come from anywhere. The attackers had worn gloves, masks, had been careful not to leave anything behind. Ricardo Barker held a press conference, demanding justice, threatening to lodge formal complaints with the State Department. But his outrage was tempered by a growing awareness that public opinion was not on his side. Details about Francisco's past victims began to emerge in the press. Leaked, Douglas suspected, by Detective Cruz or someone like him. Suddenly, Ricardo Barker wasn't a grieving father demanding justice. He was a man whose son had terrorized vulnerable people while hiding behind diplomatic protection. The press tore them apart. And then, 10 days after Francisco's attack, Ricardo Barker disappeared. He left the Venezuelan consulate in the morning to attend a meeting at the State Department. His diplomatic security detail reported that he got into his car alone, dismissing them for the morning. He never arrived at the State Department. His car was found abandoned in a parking garage in Arlington. No body, no ransom demand, no explanation. Detective Cruz came by the hospital again, this time with federal agents. They asked Douglas the same questions, got the same answers. Douglas had been at the hospital every day, visible and accounted for. His phone records showed no suspicious calls. His financials were clean. There was no evidence connecting him to anything. The agents left unsatisfied, but with nothing to charge him with. You're playing with fire, Cruz told him privately as they walked him out. I don't know how you did it, and I don't want to know. But whoever you're working with, these are dangerous people, Mr. Casey. You need to be careful. I appreciate your concern, Detective, Douglas said. But I really don't know what you're talking about. Cruz just shook his head and walked away. That night, Douglas received a final message on the satellite phone. The diplomat has been dealt with. He will not be found. The debt is paid. The favor is owed. Goodbye, Americanettes. Douglas took the phone apart, burned the circuit board in the hospital's incinerator with the help of a friendly maintenance worker, and threw the pieces in 3 different dumpsters across the city. It was over. Almost. 3 weeks later, Sarah came home from the hospital. Her face was still bandaged, but the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. She'd need more surgeries, more therapy, but she would heal, both physically and, with time, mentally. The day after she came home, a package arrived at their door. No return address, just a plain brown box with Douglas's name on it. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Russian, for when you need to remember why. Douglas waited until Ellen and Sarah were asleep, then plugged the drive into his computer. It contained a single video file. He watched it once, his face expressionless. The video showed Ricardo Barker in a room similar to the one where Francisco had been held. But what happened to Ricardo was different. Worse, the Volkov Brigade had been creative, had drawn out, had made sure Ricardo understood exactly why he was suffering. At the end, before they killed him, Alexei Volkov had leaned close to Ricardo's face and said, "This is what happens when you raise a monster. This is what happens when you think your position makes you untouchable. Remember that in hell." Douglas deleted the video, destroyed the USB drive, and sat in the darkness of his study for a long time. He should have felt guilt, should have felt horror at what he'd unleashed. But all he felt was a grim satisfaction that the world was now missing 2 predators who'd hidden behind diplomatic immunity to hurt innocent people. And underneath that satisfaction, worry. Because somewhere in the world, the Volkov Brigade was still out there. And someday, they would call in their favor. When that day came, Douglas Casey would have to answer. But tonight, his daughter was safe. His wife was sleeping peacefully. His family was whole, or as whole as it could be after trauma like this. Tonight, that was enough. 6 months passed. Sarah underwent 2 more reconstructive surgeries, both successful. The scars would always be there, faint lines across her cheek and orbital area, but she'd learned to accept them. She deferred Yale for a year, but was planning to attend the following fall. She'd started a support group for victims of assault whose attackers had avoided prosecution through legal loopholes, and it was gaining traction. Ellen went back to work as a teacher, though she still had nightmares about that first day in the hospital. Douglas continued his consulting work, boring and safe and utterly unremarkable. The investigation into Ricardo Barker's disappearance eventually went cold. The Venezuelan government made noises about diplomatic incidents, but ultimately let it drop. Francisco Barker, unable to face the shame of what had happened to him and abandoned by his country, left the United States and was never heard from again. Detective Brian Cruz was promoted to lieutenant. He never mentioned the Barker case to Douglas again, but whenever they passed each other in the city, he would give Douglas a slight nod. Acknowledgement, respect, and warning all rolled into one. Life returned to something like normal. Then, on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 7 months after that night in Arlington Cemetery, Douglas's regular cell phone rang with an unknown number. He answered, expecting a telemarketer. "Americanettes," Alexei Volkov's voice said. "It is time." Douglas's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "The favor. We're calling it in. There's a man in Baltimore, a judge. He has been problematic. We need information from him. Information he will not give willingly. You will help us get it." "I'm not doing that," Douglas said. "Our business is finished. Our business is finished when I say it is finished. You made a deal, Americanettes. The wolf fed. Now you must honor your debt. I help you get revenge for my daughter. That doesn't mean I'm going to help you threaten a federal judge." "Then perhaps we should have a conversation with Detective Cruz," Volkov said softly. "Perhaps we should tell him about the satellite phone, about the video, about you're bluffing. You'd expose yourselves." "Would we? We have been doing this for 30 years, my friend. We know how to insulate ourselves. But you? You are just a civilian who made a very bad choice. Who would the authorities believe?" Douglas was quiet, rage and fear warring in his chest. "You have 48 hours, Volkov said. We will send you the details. If you refuse, there will be consequences. Not for you, for your family. We know where Sarah will be attending Yale. We know where Ellen teaches. We know, if you touch them, then do as we ask, and we will never touch them. This is the price, Americanets. This is what you agreed to. The line went dead. Douglas stood in his kitchen, shaking with fury. He'd known this day would come, had known the debt would be called in eventually. But he'd hoped, prayed, that it never would. Now, he had a choice. Help the Volkov Brigade with whatever criminal enterprise they were running, or risk everything. His family, his freedom, his life. It was the worst kind of trap. But as Douglas thought about it, as he turned the problem over in his mind the way he used to when he worked for the CIA, an idea began to form. The Volkov Brigade thought they had him backed into a corner. They thought he was helpless, obligated, trapped. They were wrong. Douglas Casey had been a CIA operative for 8 years. He knew how to run operations, knew how to manipulate, how to deceive, how to turn a trap around on the people who'd set it. The brigade wanted him to help them get information from a federal judge. Fine, he would help them, but not the way they expected. Douglas spent the next 48 hours preparing. He called in favors from old contacts, people who still owed him from his CIA days. He researched the Judge Volkov had mentioned, Judge Lester Berry, a federal judge in Baltimore with a reputation for tough sentences in organized crime cases. Whatever the brigade wanted from him, it wasn't good. When the next message came with instructions, Douglas followed them. He met with Volkov's men, accepted the assignment, played the part of the reluctant but obedient asset. But what they didn't know was that Douglas had already made another call. To FBI special agent in charge Brian Peters, who Douglas had worked with during a joint CIA-FBI operation in 2002. I need your help, Douglas had told him, and it needs to be completely off the books. Peters had listened to the whole story. The attack on Sarah, the deal with the brigade, the leverage they now held over him. Peters should have arrested Douglas on the spot. Instead, he said, let me make some calls. Because Brian Peters remembered Douglas Casey as one of the best operators he'd ever worked with. And he knew that if Casey was coming to him, it was because Casey had a plan. The plan was simple, turn the trap around. Douglas would play along with the brigade's plan, would help them set up their approach to Judge Berry. But at the last moment, when the brigade thought they had everything in place, the FBI would be waiting. You'll need to testify, Peters had warned. About everything. The deal you made, what happened to Francisco and Ricardo Barker. All of it. I know, Douglas said, but my family will be safe. Witness protection if necessary. We'll make sure the brigade never gets near them. It was a risk, a huge risk, but it was better than being under the Volkov Brigade's thumb forever, better than living in fear that they'd someday decide to hurt Sarah or Ellen for leverage. So Douglas played his part perfectly. He gathered the information the brigade wanted. He helped them plan their approach to Judge Berry. He played the reluctant accomplice so well that Volkov himself complimented him on his professionalism. And then, on the night they were supposed to make their move, when the brigade had committed themselves fully to the operation, the FBI swept in. 3 of Volkov's men were arrested on the spot. A 4th was killed in the ensuing firefight. Only Volkov himself escaped, disappearing into the night like the ghost he'd always been. But it was enough. The Bureau had the men, had the evidence, had everything they needed to dismantle the brigade's operations in the United States. And Douglas had his freedom. Almost. Because 2 days later, as he was preparing to enter witness protection with his family, his phone rang one last time. Clever, Americanets, Volkov's voice said. Very clever. I should have known better than to trust a CIA man. It's over, Alexei. Turn yourself in. The FBI has everything. They have nothing. They have 3 men who know nothing and can prove less. But you betrayed us. You broke the deal. You threatened my family. The deal was void. Deals like ours are never void. They are for life. And you have taken 3 of my brothers. Volkov's voice was cold, emotionless. I will take one of yours. The line went dead. Douglas's blood turned to ice. He called Ellen immediately. Where are you? At home. Sarah and I are packing for Doug. What's wrong? Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in. I'm calling Peters right now to get agents to the house. 5 minutes. Can you hold out for 5 minutes? Doug, you're scaring me. Lock the doors. Now. He heard her moving, heard the deadbolt sliding home. Then the chain. We're locked in. What's happening? Douglas was already on the other line with Peters. Volkov's coming for my family. I need agents at my house now. On their way. ETA, 4 minutes. Douglas stayed on the line with Ellen, listening to her and Sarah barricade themselves in the upstairs bedroom. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. Then Ellen screamed. "He's in the house," she shouted. "Doug, he's in the house." "How is he in the house?" Douglas heard crashing, heard Sarah screaming. He was in his car, driving like a madman toward his home, but he was 10 minutes away. Too far. Too slow. "Ellen," he shouted into the phone. "Ellen." Static. Then Volkov's voice. "Say goodbye to your wife, Americanets." "No. Volkov. Please, I'll do anything. You should have thought of that before you betrayed us." Douglas heard 2 gunshots. Then silence. His world ended in that moment of silence. He drove the rest of the way in a haze, arriving just as FBI vehicles pulled up. Peters was there, his face grim. "Doug." Douglas pushed past him, running into the house. Up the stairs, to the bedroom where Ellen was standing by the window, holding Sarah protectively. Both were unhurt. On the floor lay Alexei Volkov, 2 bullets in his chest. Detective Brian Cruz stood over the body, his service weapon still drawn. "I owed you one," Cruz said simply, "for what you did to Francisco Barker. I've been keeping an eye on your place since the federal investigation started. Saw this guy break in, called it in, and came inside." He looked down at Volkov's body. He pulled a weapon. "I had no choice." Douglas wanted to collapse, wanted to weep with relief, but instead he just wrapped his arms around his wife and daughter and held them tight. "It's over," he whispered. "It's really over now." And for the first time in 8 months, he believed it. The aftermath took weeks to sort out. Douglas gave his testimony to the FBI, detailing everything that had happened. He expected to be arrested, charged with conspiracy, accessory to murder, a dozen other crimes. Instead, Brian Peters pulled strings, argued that Douglas had been acting under duress, had ultimately cooperated with federal authorities, had helped dismantle a dangerous criminal organization. The U.S. attorney agreed to immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Francisco Barker's case was quietly reopened. With Ricardo dead and Francisco permanently incapacitated, there was no diplomatic pressure to keep it buried. The other victims came forward. Francisco was extradited to stand trial for multiple counts of assault. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Detective Cruz was commended for his actions in stopping Alexei Volkov. He never mentioned suspecting Douglas's involvement in the Barker case. Some things, he decided, were better left buried. Sarah started at Yale the following fall. Her scars faded to faint lines. Her trauma transformed into strength. She became an advocate for crime victims, particularly those whose attackers had used wealth or position to avoid justice. Her work made a difference, helped change laws, helped people who'd been left behind by the system. Ellen returned to teaching, proud of her daughter, grateful for her husband, trying not to think too much about what had happened in those terrible months. And Douglas Casey went back to his boring, safe, utterly unremarkable life. Except for the nightmares. Those never quite went away. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night, remembering the video on that USB drive, remembering the sound Francisco Barker had made, remembering the cold satisfaction he'd felt watching it. Sometimes he wondered if he'd done the right thing, if there had been another way, if he'd sold his soul for revenge that, in the end, had cost him more than he'd ever imagined. But then he would go downstairs and see Sarah's picture on the mantle. Her Yale graduation photo, smile bright and genuine, scars visible but not defining, and he would remember why he'd done it. Some fathers would have accepted the injustice, would have relied on the system, on laws and procedures and the slow, grinding wheels of justice. Douglas Casey was not that kind of father. He was the kind who, when his daughter was hurt and the system failed her, would make a deal with demons to ensure she got the justice she deserved. He was the kind who would burn the world down to keep his family safe. And yes, he paid a terrible price for it, had nearly lost everything, had been forced to become a monster to fight monsters. But Sarah was alive. She was thriving. She was happy. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The wolf had been hungry. The wolf had fed. And now, finally, the wolf could rest. 5 years later, Douglas Casey sat on his porch in suburban Virginia, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and amber, just like that first night in Sarah's hospital room. But everything was different now. Sarah had graduated from Yale with honors, was working for a nonprofit that helped crime victims navigate the legal system. She'd found purpose in her trauma, had transformed her pain into power that helped others. Ellen had been promoted to principal of her school. She still had nightmares sometimes, but they were fewer now, farther between. Douglas had gone back to school himself, gotten a degree in social work, and now worked alongside Sarah's organization, helping other families navigate the impossible choices he'd once faced. They'd never spoken about what really happened to the Barkers. Ellen knew, of course. Sarah suspected, but it remained an unspoken understanding between them. Sometimes, love required crossing lines that should never be crossed. The satellite phone was long gone, burned and scattered. The video had been deleted. The brigade was dismantled, its members dead or in prison. Alexei Volkov was buried in an unmarked grave. Ricardo and Francisco Barker were never found. And Douglas Casey, former CIA operative, once monster, now advocate for crime victims, had found something like peace. He would never forget what he'd done, would never stop carrying the weight of those choices. But he'd learned to live with it, the same way soldiers learn to live with the weight of war. Because in the end, he hadn't done it for himself. He'd done it for Sarah, for Ellen, for every father who'd watched their daughter suffer and felt that same impotent rage, that same desperate need for justice when the system failed. He'd done what fathers do. He'd protected his child, at any cost, through any means necessary. The sun finally set, darkness falling across the Virginia suburbs. Douglas stood, stretched, and went inside to where Ellen was making dinner and Sarah was visiting for the weekend. His family, whole, safe, happy. Whatever sins he'd committed, whatever demons he'd made deals with, it had been worth it for this. The wolf was no longer hungry, but it would always be watching, always ready, because that's what fathers do. They protect their own, no matter what it costs, no matter what it takes, forever.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.